Hi guys, and welcome to the 5th edition of Talking Travel with me, Andrew. If this is the first time that you've joined us on these chats, basically we run down and look at some of the travel industry news, we have a feature of the week, and then we also start to look at some featured destinations. It's not a set format, but that's generally the way that it goes. These are weekly chats that come out to try and give you guys a little bit more information, and it's also a platform for you to raise questions and concerns or get ideas on travel that you might be planning in the future. So please feel free to interact with us, either on Facebook at facebook.com/wildeyesa, and then you can follow me on Twitter at AndrewBeckSA, and Wildeye on Twitter as WildEyeSA. The other side of things is that we have a photographic division which Gerry Vanderwalt runs. You can follow him on Twitter at gerryvanderwalt and catch him weekly with the photo chat. This week he's had a look at sharpening and over-sharpening and wildlife photography in general. So it's a fantastic chat for you guys to follow. That comes out on a weekly basis every single Monday, as does the Talking Travel, usually on a Monday. This week's slightly delayed. Right, moving on with the industry news. Probably the biggest news in the industry this week is that the Wildeye website, the much anticipated launch of the website, will be happening on Monday the 24th of October. So be sure to head on over to www.wild-eye.co.za and check out the site from next Monday. On a more serious note, there was a recent plane crash in Moremi in Botswana. On the 14th of October, a caravan which was carrying 10 people crashed on leaving Kakanaka airfield. The reports are still a little bit sketchy, but the latest that I have is that there were 7 people who were killed and 3 people who are seriously injured in that crash. And investigations are underway as to what caused the crash, but they do think that it was engine failure, was the latest that I heard this morning. Obviously our condolences go out to the family and friends of all of those involved. It's a very, very sad incident that's taken place. But for anyone that is traveling to Botswana or is planning to travel to Botswana, just a sort of word of assurance. With the number of flights that are taking place there on a daily basis, the safety records are incredibly good at the moment, and this really does seem to be a sort of a freak incident. But Moremi have grounded their entire fleet for the next couple of days until they've resolved this whole situation. So again, our condolences to all of those involved. The feature this week follows on from last week's chat where we had a look at comparing Pilanesberg and Madikwe. A lot of people traveling to South Africa are never sure of which of these areas they should visit. And with the amount of information that's out there and different opinions, it becomes very, very difficult. So the idea here is to try and help you guys get an insider's view as to the way I see these areas and try and help you to understand which is better or which would suit your needs better. So this week we're going to be looking at Kruger National Park versus Madikwe. We're going to put them head to head in a number of categories, give you the information about it, and then make some recommendations. The first thing that we need to start off with is, with Kruger National Park, you've got to look at it in 2 aspects. There's the Greater Kruger National Park, which offers the self-drive tourist a perfect destination. You can make use of camping facilities, chalets, guest houses, and that's all in the national park itself. A lot of the time it's self-drives. There are drives that depart from some of the bigger camps in the evenings and the mornings, and there are also walks that you can do from some of these camps. But for the greater part, it's self-catering accommodation and self-drives. The other side of Kruger National Park, and this is where it comes down to the private lodges, is the area on the western boundary of the park itself. There's a conglomeration of reserves there which together form the Associated Private Nature Reserves, or APNR. And these are private reserves, private landowners who have pooled their land together to form a larger conservation area on the western side of Kruger National Park. Now some of these areas are actually open to Kruger National Park, which allows the movement of game between Greater Kruger National Park and the APNR, essentially extending the western boundary of the Kruger National Park. These places include the Timbavati, the Kaseri, the Sabi Sands, and those sort of things. Thornybush and Kapama although they're adjacent to the Kruger National Park, they are actually still privately fenced-in entities and are not open to the park itself. Fence lines, I'm sure a lot of people have seen a lot of movement, especially things like leopards and cheetahs and wild dogs that move in between these areas. But for the greater part, there's very little movement of game between the two regions. So and obviously in this APNR, there's a range of camps from self-catering all the way through to the luxurious 5-star camps. Now, in order to compare apples with apples, when we're comparing this Kruger region to Madikwe, we're going to be focusing on the APNR and not on the Greater Kruger National Park. There are some private concessions within the Greater Kruger National Park, but for the most part it's self-catering camps, which are national parks camps. So we are going to be comparing the APNR, which is the Associated Private Nature Reserves on the western side of Kruger, to Madikwe. Location-wise, Madikwe, obviously getting there by road from Johannesburg, about a 3.5 to 4 hour drive, and getting into Kruger is slightly longer depending on which area you're going to. The Hoedspruit Central region, which is where a lot of the entrance gates to these private nature reserves is located, that's probably a good 5 or 6 hour drive from Johannesburg. Flights, obviously there's flights from Madikwe into Johannesburg every single day and vice versa, and also up from Johannesburg into the Hoedspruit area. Depending on who you're flying with, you might actually land at one of the private airstrips located within one of those reserves. Otherwise, you'll be more than likely landing at Hoedspruit. And that's also just over an hour and a half's flight, if I'm not mistaken. Wildlife viewing. This is where it gets interesting. And I'm sure we're going to create quite a bit of controversy here about this. But I've been to both of these areas. I've spent quite a bit of time guiding in Madikwe and have done a number of trips up into the Lowveld region. And I feel that Madikwe is better from a general game viewing point of view. So for things like zebra, wildebeest, giraffe, white rhino, far better in the Madikwe region than in the Lowveld. And with dogs, wild dogs and elephants as well, plenty of elephants to be seen in Madikwe. And Madikwe is also it has a bit of a reputation for being one of the best places to go and see wild dogs in South Africa. In the Lowveld, big five: buffalo, elephant, lion, leopard, and to a lesser degree, rhino. Driving around in the private reserves on the western side of Kruger, that is big cat country. Lions and leopards abound. Especially in the Sabi Sand area, they have a reputation for being the best place in the country to go and see leopards. Timbavati is also a fantastic place for viewing leopards, as well as wild dogs up in that northern section. So generally, the game viewing is skewed towards big five and big cats in the Lowveld, with Madikwe being a sort of overall bigger picture. Plenty of lions to be seen in Madikwe as well. And experience-wise, Madikwe is about 75,000 hectares and has no restrictions on traversing, apart from small, concessions that are in the reserve. The guides just need, out of courtesy, to get in touch with the lodge and just request permission, but that's almost never denied. It's very different in the APNR region. So, as we mentioned earlier, the APNR is a conglomeration of reserves which have been pooled together, private landowners putting their land together. Some of these guys might own a couple of hundred hectares, some of them might own a couple of thousand hectares. Now, with all of this coming together and being put under one umbrella, the APNR, you have a situation where some people have negotiated traversing rights with other landowners and others not. So depending on the lodge that you're going to be staying at, you might only have traversing rights over a couple of hundred hectares all the way up to a couple of thousand hectares. So that's something to check out when you're booking in this region, is just to make sure how big the traversing area of that specific lodge that you're interested in is. You don't want to be caught on a 4-day stay where you're only going to be able to traverse on a couple of hundred hectares. Now, what does this mean from a game viewing perspective? If you're driving down in the Timbavati, for example, and the lodge that you are staying at has not got traversing rights with an adjacent property, and you're following a female leopard with cubs, and she crosses that little intersection and moves on to the next adjacent property, that's where your sighting stops. Whether she goes to lie down underneath a tree or is returning to a kill, you're not going to be able to follow her anymore unless there's a traversing agreement in place which will allow your guide to drive on that land. So that can be quite frustrating from a sightings point of view. In Madikwe, that doesn't happen. The only time that you might be denied to follow an animal or on a sighting like that would be if it was moving towards a lodge waterhole. So that's something to take into account when looking at staying in these areas. How long should you stay for? Madikwe, I've said this before, anywhere from a minimum of 2 nights to 4 nights is great. It's pretty close to Joburg, so 2 nights is still doable. In the Lowveld, I would say an absolute minimum of 2 nights, especially if you're going to be driving. It does take quite a while to get there, a little bit longer. So anywhere from two nights to 6 nights. You could easily combine 2 lodges in different regions here. The Greater Kruger National Park and the private nature reserves are also a fantastic combination if you're looking to do a self-drive activity. Great way to go into Kruger National Park first, experience the national park side of things, make use of the park sport accommodation and do self-drives, and then a night or 2 at one of the private lodges on the western side would just give you that extra bit of information with a guide and give you a better chance of seeing perhaps some of the species that you might not have encountered during your time in Kruger. So those are good combinations for anywhere from a 2 to 6 night stay. Which should you choose? Well, again, it all comes down to budget and the amount of time that you have. But for families, I would suggest Madikwe. The Lowveld region and Kruger National Park are malaria areas, so that's something to take into account when looking for a destination that's going to be family friendly. You can take your kids along with you. Madikwe is malaria free, and that is a big draw card for that reserve. If you're a first time traveller to South Africa and first time on safari, I would suggest then Madikwe is a great destination as it offers a wide variety of general game. So there's a lot of general game on offer all the time. In the Lowveld, the perk there for the first time traveller is that you would more than likely be able to get big 5, and you will see lots of leopard, buffalo and lion. To a lesser degree, elephant and rhino, depending on which of the reserves you're visiting. Both places are fantastic, and I can guarantee you that you won't have a poor experience in either of them. So yeah, that's the chat for this week. If you're following us on Facebook, you'll see I've put up a poll for this week, looking at what your #1 travel gadget or little, one of those must-have items that you always pack into your bag when you're heading out for a travel. Next week's chat, we're going to have a look at some of my favorite items that I like to include when I head out into the bush, and that just make traveling and packing that a little bit easier. So check out the poll, send us any questions or suggestions that you might have, or something that you might want to see in future episodes of this chats, and yeah, otherwise we'll see you guys next week. Cheers.